From the home offices of Ash and Flo, this is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome, everybody, to this new episode of Unbillable Hours. Hello, Ash, and hello, Andy Rogerson, who joins us here. He's kind enough to participate. And he's the founder and managing director, is that right, Andy, of Grist, which is a UK-based thought leadership agency. And he came to our attention because you keep publishing very insightful reports on the value of thought leadership. You have it's not super recent, but you have a new edition out, and we stumbled across that, thought it was interesting, and we just asked you to come by and talk to us about it. So welcome, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's probably worth saying that this research that we publish, the edition that we're talking about is the third edition, which was the research was completed in September and October of 2020.
All right.
And we're actually just rerunning that research now.
Yeah, and great stuff. Like I looked at all the previous editions as well. I was late to the game, but then I read everything. So, and for the people who don't know what we're talking about, I think you're diving deep into the reading habits, right, of senior executives, and ask questions about how they I don't know, consume thought leadership, content, what their expectations are, which kind of value they find, and so forth. So do you want to give a maybe super quick summary of the most recent edition? I'd be delighted to hear it.
Sure. It's probably worth, I always quite like to start thinking about thought leadership and why we actually created this particular piece of thought leadership. And we work with, not dissimilar to yourselves, with tech firms, financial services, and prof services firms. And this research was very much trying to help them get a better understanding of what their clients wanted from thought leadership. Yeah. And we often talk about the sweet spot. And if you think about it, that this for us is getting to the sweet spot. I want to be able to tell my clients something new about their clients.
Yeah.
So we interviewed, it was over 500 senior execs at enterprise level firms across the globe. So the Americas, UK, Europe, and Asia. It was pan-sector. And we were just talking about age before we started recording. It's fascinating. I think these are the most senior people, the biggest companies around the world. I think something like 1 in 5 was under 34. So they're running the biggest companies, which is quite staggering. But maybe that's worth my
thanks for pointing this out, because we had this discussion in previous episodes, how many consulting firms, especially if you think about distribution of thought leadership, many consulting firms have, like, if they have it, might, for example, have a social media strategy and playbook, but was developed in 2018, right? And to your point, now you have people of our generation and younger attaining very senior jobs. So you maybe should revisit your hypothesis about Instagram, Snapchat, maybe even TikTok, because you have these, whatever the generations are, millennials, Gen Z, and so on, now moving into very senior corporate positions. But that's just a side note. So thanks for confirming that. That's the first surprising finding, but you're very right, and that's worth mentioning. Yeah.
The other thing, you asked me if there was anything surprising.
Yeah.
And so, this was the third time, as we said, that we've run this research program. We're looking at the fourth one now. And maybe it wasn't surprising per se, but actually confirmed a couple of thoughts, which I think are worth kind of highlighting. If you had a look at thought leadership pre the pandemic, it was often either about mega trends or horizon scanning, whatever we wanted to call that. It was far-sighted, and indeed, PwC is one of our biggest clients. They've even got whole series on mega trends.
Yeah.
But with the pandemic, the actual tension of the C-suite and the areas in which they wanted help shortened because of the pandemic. Yeah. So almost a third of the people that we spoke to wanted help in the really short term, i.e. 0 to 3 months. Yeah. Around 49%, so the majority actually wanted help within 3 to 12 months. So it was effectively how their firms were going to come out of this, what the organizational structure was going to look like, what the business model was going to be. I hate the word pivot, but if they needed to pivot. So that kind of shortening of the C-suite's attention span was probably one of the biggest things to come out of this piece of research.
Okay.
And think of the impact on that when we start to plan our marketing programs. So typically, marketing planning, we do that once a year, and we do it maybe a couple of months before that year starts, and we typically don't revisit as the year continues. So if we're expecting to answer all of the questions or all of the problems right there, I think there's a difficulty. I think it's causing us all to rethink how we do that.
And that would have implications on the actual thought leadership production model, so to speak, as well, though, right? But not just the planning, because planning is one thing, but then what's the average turnaround time on a major piece of TL is often like, I don't know, 6 months to 9 months is nothing, probably, for just doing the research, lining everything up, building the story, blah, blah, and then you still have to publish it and drive it, right?
That's right. And typically in my world, it wouldn't necessarily be 6 to 9 months in my world. If it's survey driven, which thought leadership doesn't necessarily have to be, but we believe in a survey, and we can touch on that one as well. Typically, kind of around 3 to 5 months.
Okay.
But it's still a considerable time period.
You'd still be too late for some of the expectations you just mentioned, right? And you have this breakdown in the report of what the time windows are and what the expectations are around there.
So I had a question, Andy. Like, amongst these things that was surprising, like, what were more on like a fear-driven and what were more on a delight-driven kind of thing that you could see? Because this whole the shortening period is probably like more of a fear because of all the massive changes that have been happening the last 2 years. But I just want to get a little bit of your view on that.
On the fear side of things.
The fear side of things, and on the more positive, delightful, like they felt validated and they continued, but it was still.
If I can step in, I think that maybe goes to your what are they expecting, or what are they hoping to find as they read, Andy, right? Yeah. You have stats on that as well, right? Why do they read it?
Yeah.
To what end? The C-suite read thought leadership, the same as anybody, to help them within their decision making.
Yeah.
And I think you think about what was going on with the pandemic. We're hitting this era. Nobody had lived through that before, and one of the interesting other changes was that typically, if you have a look at these surveys in thought leadership, you survey the peers. So if I am, I don't know, let's just take, I am leading a tech practice at one of the big consultancies. Typically, what I like to read about is how others leading tech practices at other consultancies are reacting to this change. Interestingly, pre-pandemic, that would have been backed up in the research. So they said that the favorite people for me to research would be my peers. During the pandemic, it wasn't, but peers dropped right down to the end, because the C-suite did not think that the answers to their problems lay with their peers, because all of their peers were having the same hard time.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden they started to reach out, and they started talking about inspirational individuals outside of their industry, or leading business thinkers within their industry, not just their peers. And again, it is fear, and I think that was the prevailing thoughts during the pandemic. To be honest, Dash, it was, but it was a difference in who might actually have some of these answers. There was also a massive lean in to professional services firms, because people thought, actually, maybe these guys and the collective wisdom within that, maybe they can help me more than a chat with my peers, more than a chat with my internal organization. So that was another big change.
So am I hearing between the lines there, though, that also the focus, like within help with the decision making, there's a different focus I could choose, right? I could look at, I'm reading this to get a better handle on defining the problem. I could be reading to just find solutions, whatever. Sounds like people went from, please explain to me what my problem is, because that was abundantly clear, straight for the please provide some solutions. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is. And again, I think the pandemic effectively accelerated quite a lot of change. The change was happening anyway. So another trend that we've probably seen over the last 10 years is 10 years ago, you could create thought leadership just around brand awareness. after 5 years to 3 years.
So, sorry, can I ask about it? Can you explain that a little bit? What would you have an example for?
As in, you could create thought leadership, which just identified issues as you've just described.
Oh, okay.
So we're not talking about solutions here. We're just talking about issues.
And the brand awareness aspect being, I would, as a reader, I would pick that up because it has, I don't know, McKinsey on the front cover, and I'd be saying, okay, yeah,
exactly.
Okay, yeah, understood.
But thought leadership moved into the middle of the funnel and is continuing to do that. So what the C-suite are actually wanting is for us to create thought leadership, which talks about solutions, which doesn't just raise the issue and leave the issue hanging, but explores what people are actually doing, and that enables them to make better decisions. So thought leadership has moved to the middle. Absolutely, it's moved to the middle of the funnel. And unless now, all of the proposals that we get, the RFPs that we get, there's as much about lead gen as there is about brand awareness. You can never take brand out of it, but it is about that lead gen, and I think that reinforces the fact that people want solutions and clients want leads.
Doesn't that make your job super hard though? Because I'm guessing like there's a finite pool of, there's all kinds of interesting and creative ways to frame a problem, but then like lower down the funnel, the solutions at some point in time, a certain level of scale will look the same. Or am I mistaken? Like, I imagine that makes it harder to create something that is very differentiated. And we've all been there. We've all had this pain of feature parity. Like I had a content marketing role previously to what I'm doing now. And I've been in there and lived the pain of, we published something, great, it's done. Oh, shucks, it's just the same like this other piece by the other firm that came out at the same time. Like it's tough, right?
It is tough, but that's what we need to be doing as marketers. If you think professional services, and we use the broadest definition to include IT services, management consultants, etc. Our problem is differentiation.
Yeah,
isn't it? But particularly when you think about it, we were talking about law firms earlier on. I know there's less law firms on it, but if you're working with a law firm and the whole insurance division can pick itself up, walk across the road, and set itself up in a new, where's the difference?
That's a nice way of describing it. Yeah, that's just the reality. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
but it can. So we really need to unpick that. And I think one of the questions again that you were asking me, which I think gets to the nub of this. You were talking about near misses in terms of typical misses in what we choose to talk about. And it's interesting, isn't it? Thought leadership is probably widely regarded as one of the most effective marketing channels. We all probably agree with that now. Over 9 in 10 of the people that we talk to said it's important in the decision making of which advisor to appoint. So over 9 in 10. I mean, that's also fascinating. So it is critical. Yeah. But typically, we often start with either an interesting question from the partner, let's say, or an interesting thought from the partner. But in reality, we need to start with our readers, don't we? And really get under the skin of the readers and think what's going to engage that in their world. And only then, once we've engaged them, are we going to be able to reinforce our position as a trusted partner, whatever it is that we're trying to communicate.
That does bring an interesting question, Andy. Like because they're thinking about from a thought leader kind of thing and not an audience driven kind of thing. Does that mean that as thought leadership, as the reading habits of people, in decision making roles change because of age or whatever, do they need to adopt a more journalistic style so that they can literally start pushing it into the right, into the right medium for conversation?
We often talk about style, and I think we need to think about style and all of that polishing. I think at the end we need to get the subject matter nailed on at the start, and I think too often these exercises we don't spend enough time thinking about what the topic is. The way we look at it is starting at the end and working backwards. So you're thinking, the partnership, Ash, what business conversations does that partnership want to have? What does that business conversation actually look like? What headlines would they really like to see?
Yeah.
And working backwards, thinking, what if that's the business conversation or the headline that you want to see? What's the data that's going to back that up? And if that's the data that you need to have that conversation, what are the questions that we need to ask in the survey in order to arm you with the data to give you the conversation that you want to have?
can I ask about the survey, because that's always been it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, is, and I'm just going to speak about my personal stuff here. I've done quite a few surveys or commissioned them, where while I was doing them, I was thinking, okay, essentially what I'm doing here is I'm asking people about their opinions of the future, which is actually, if you think about it, not super interesting. As I got more experience and got more possibilities to do it, I tried to do more projects where we would try and find and scrape data of stuff people were actually doing, and then build inference from that, as opposed to, because there's a huge, there's a whole difference between what I think will happen, what my opinions are, blah blah, and so forth, and what I'm doing, right? My question is, since the radar is changing, process needs to change, planning needs to change. Also, you have to be you have to be smart about differentiating. Is the survey-driven piece of thought leadership still sort of the main workhorse, or do you see, is that shifting towards? Because I think you could both be faster in producing stuff, maybe have more interesting insights, and differentiate by not doing the survey, but find some other way of getting empirical data. I don't know.
No, you can, absolutely, and I think that's a really good question. In our world, there's lots of talk about the death of the survey and whether people were still filling them out during the pandemic, etc., etc.
Okay.
But people are, if you get the topic nailed on. Now, our view is the good stuff needs to come from somewhere, and it cannot just come from interviews with the internal client, no matter how bright they are, because it's still going to come across as a little bit like a brochure, a little bit like a puff paste. It's just them talking. So if we accept the fact that the good stuff needs to come from somewhere, well, where does it actually come from? It can still come from the survey, and most of the projects that we're looking at still include a survey. It could come from qualitative interviews with clients and others. Nothing wrong with that, but you miss out on the data element. Or it could come from, as you say, scraping data, whatever, wherever that comes on, modeling, etc. But if you think about that, you are scraping data that already exists. It's in the public domain. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get to it. If it's in the public domain, then it's not new.
So that's a fair point. Sorry, Ash, can I just quickly answer that is a fair point, but I was not necessarily thinking, back in the day when I had those conversations, I was not necessarily thinking about necessarily publicly available data, but my idea was more about tapping into the data you might have as a consulting firm, or stuff that's, should we say, semi-public. Maybe parts of it exist in public domain, but no one has correlated it in an interesting way or whatever. I don't know. I have nothing but that was my idea. But your point about just scraping stuff that's outside, that's fair made. Like that is not differentiating, probably, because everybody could have told.
I agree. And just answering that point, we do need to look, and to be honest, if another one of the litmus tests of whether thought leadership works is whether you can include it within the pitch documents that you're creating. I think that is a great litmus test as well. But just thinking about that data perspective, we're seeing quite a lot of people develop benchmarking tools.
Yeah.
Where you're looking at survey responses. The survey, let's just say 300 people talking about whether they're ready for net zero, whatever that might be. And then the client, we would create the tool for the client, and the client can sit with their client and say, well, on this maturity curve of net zero, let's just look at where you sit, and can plug data in with them there and then. And a response, I think that's a fantastic use of data that's created, plus new data, plus thinking that already exists. So I absolutely agree with that. Yes.
But Ash, you had a question as well, right? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just trying to gauge, Andy, like, what do you consider as the priority in terms of where you get in? Like, you've got your surveys, you've got the data that comes in, you've got like pieces as you build out the thought leadership. Obviously, there is a narrative that you're trying to build, but still, in order to make it more effective and useful for the reader more than the leader, how would you prioritize your sources, really, like, of building this out?
How do we prioritize the inputs?
Yeah, the inputs and and the thought that goes behind building that narrative.
Well, it's kind of a multifaceted question, but
it is.
If I look at the inputs that are used, I mean, regularly you've got the desk research side of things, which, desk research needs to be part of any questions. And this I'm talking about once we've got to the topic, that there needs to be a whole defined process to actually get to that topic. But once we have it, there's the desk research. We fundamentally believe in the survey. And I think that the survey, it needs to draw on all of the data that we already know and the thinking of the firm and all of that pitch good stuff that he talked about there. That makes an awful lot of sense. Well, I agree with that. But we need to develop something new.
Yeah.
So that's laid on. We love the qualitative interviews. So if the quantitative research gives you 9 out of 10 cats like whiskers, the qualitative interviews, we need to dig and find out, well, what did the one cat not like about whiskers, and why didn't it like whiskers, and what would it really like? So we need to dig deeper. We like to build.
I love that.
We love to build those qualitative interviews into think tanks. Is quite a popular term at the moment, but the way we look at that is, if you're interviewing 10 people, let's say a couple from the client and 8 of their clients, it's really nice to be able to draw a ring around those people and not just use them for sound bites for the report, say Ash or Flo says this, but we keep them together. We include them in the report. Maybe we develop the interviews into something like this, into a podcast or into videos. Maybe we keep them together. We bring them back for roundtable discussions. So that think tank process, just keeping them all together, is a really nice way to continue that debate. So it's desk research, it's quant programs, it's qual interviews. All of that goes together with the thinking of the client. But we need to remember, yes, we need to hit the sweet spot of the client's client, but it's marketing. And our gig is to create a dialogue between a consultant or IT practitioner and their client. That's what it's all there for. And if it does that, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Yeah. Which I want you already sort of gave me a segue to my next question, because you mentioned the think tank and the podcast and stuff. But before that, I just wanted to call out to people listening. That to me is going to be the biggest takeaway. You're saying do the survey, but then maybe if you have the budget and the time, it might be very worthwhile to look at the outliers or look at the smaller group and double click on that, as opposed to just reporting it. 15% of, laggards don't do this and that. But I love this idea of going back and finding out why. You might get the gold that way. I really like that. But that was just a side remark. So the question I have, because you mentioned it, the distribution. Yeah. Like, are you seeing changes there? Like, is because the question I had noted down is what are the misses in terms of distribution? And I always used to feel consulting firms in particular do not enough with the great stuff they're building. They do the report, they publish the report, that's it. But you now said, well, there's maybe podcast formats, there's maybe other stuff. So is there a change in that area, or are they still missing out on a lot of pieces?
There has been a change, and again, if you remember, so the research itself was undertaken 5 or 6 months after the pandemic. One of the biggest changes that came back, that I was saying, is we often talk about personalization without necessarily kind of fully understanding, well, what do we really mean by personalization? Well, what is that all of it? And we asked a series of questions. And the C-suite that we're talking to effectively said that they want thought leadership tailored to their sector. Now, if you think about that, we're 5 or 6 months into the pandemic, and look at how retail fared with technology, it's entirely different. So producing a piece of thought leadership for those two audiences, given where they were at, is almost kind of nonsensical, really, because one's on its knees, the other one is effectively struggling to keep the message that they're having record quarters, quarter after quarter, under wraps to not appear out of kilter with everybody else. So very, very different. So we need to be thinking, how do we tailor thought leadership to sector, but also job role, region, size of company, all of those attributes. Over 1 in 2 people all mentioned each one of those to say, well, I want thought leadership that's addressed to me. So in our distribution, in our formats, we need to think, how do we do that? So you see a lot of nice programs now where you've got the main body of research, but then we're tailoring that research because we've included enough for financial services, so that financial services can have their own slice of the data, and then maybe we're interviewing 2 or 3 people within financial services to make that effectively a campaign in its own right. So I think that the personalization thing, I think, is absolutely critical.
In your experience, is that so? I'm guessing, or I know that makes the budget requirements, so I can do this, go up a bit, right? Because I need a bigger sample and all that. But would you say that it's much more worth it? Because it almost sounds like if you would recommend do the more somewhat more comprehensive service and then slice and dice it, but that will make the return on investment much greater. Is that
exactly? You've hit it absolutely on the head. And we can't be glib with budgets. We can't. But the cost of a survey, maybe you're talking about an extra £10,000-15,000 in order to be able to slice and dice several different ways. Now, as long as we're using all of those slices and we're using them properly, then it's a really good investment. If we're just doing that up front and just doing a bumper survey for the sake of a bumper survey, we should keep our powder dry and just do the smallest viable survey that we possibly can. So it kind of comes back to that resource.
Not that has ever happened to me, Andy.
I'm sure
doing bumper surveys,
it's never happened to
which I then sort of missed the ship. Yeah.
The other thing that I would say is, as we think about the pandemic evolving, obviously how individuals consume thought leadership changed. Face-to-face events was a massive draw for people pre-pandemic. But then we saw the favorite 3 formats were videos, presentations, and online events. So the budget was changing, and you look at all 3 of those, and I think people were trying to replicate that engagement, that personal contact. I just had a quick look at the first cut of the results coming back for the new survey, and in-person events is back at number 1. Is what I'm saying. Do you know desperate to get back.
And do you know what my theory behind this is? And it's a bit snarky. Is because a live event gives you a captive audience. People have to drive up. There's nice snacks and so forth. So they'll stay in the room and listen, even if the quality of the keynote you're delivering is actually kind of meh. Whereas if you're running, like we had a guest on recently, Brad Yell, who had this phrase, and I liked it. He said, if you're marketing digitally, you're running naked. Right? So if you put a video out summarizing the results, and you can see in the analytics that around the minute mark, people just drop off. Like there's no argument about the quality of your stuff was at fault. So that my theory would be maybe people are. The live event gives you a bit of an excuse. If it's digital only, your thought leadership better be really, really sharp and really, really relevant. Otherwise, people will just scroll on or open another tab and be gone essentially.
I agree with you, and we can't forget. Fundamentally, this is a value exchange.
Yeah,
and if the value is not there on either side, actually, the whole thing crumbles. Yeah. So absolutely, we need to put an awful lot into it. And give people something new. Fundamentally, nobody's going to fill out a survey now if we've not nailed the topic.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to give you the time to read the material if they don't see value within what you're giving. So that is an absolute prerequisite. And we should also not forget, if you produce bad thought leadership, if it doesn't do any of the things that we've talked about, that could be a negative. So you could be worse off than not producing anything at all. So we need to absolutely nail it. I agree. Yeah.
So that actually segues nicely to a thought. So when do you recommend not doing thought leadership, essentially? Like when you've got, like, sometimes people send out a survey and you find that it's not really relevant to one of the groups that have been included. But a lot of places are like, okay, I spent the budget on it, so I'd like to get something out of it, and they still try to put something out. So, which is not really recommended, I'd say. So generally, when do you recommend not doing thought leadership, but not doing an output from, the surveys that you've just sent out?
To be honest, if you've got to the end of a survey and you're worried about the output, or all of the inputs were wrong, you shouldn't be anywhere near that. And being honest, we've been given surveys by clients who said, we did this survey, now can we find a story here? Now, you can try and retrofit a story, but it's bloody difficult. It would have been much better to think, well, what's the story up front, and how do we use that data to communicate the story? So everything, it sounds like you're cheating. It sounds like you know what the response is before you do the survey. You should have a good idea of what that's going to say actually carrying out the survey. It's marketing research. It's not market research.
Yeah.
We're not looking for something brand new. We're generally looking to corroborate a hypothesis that we know is going to be of benefit to our clients.
Yeah.
It's also going to be of benefit to their clients because they're going to get something useful. Now, I would suggest, so you shouldn't be anywhere near a survey results and worried about findings. That's just wrong. It's just badly planned. I don't think you should do thought leadership if you don't think you can back it. And by back it, I mean if you've not got the internal resource to do something with it. Because otherwise, it's just an expense.
Yeah.
And that is... that there's no point in having that expense. So keep your powder dry if there's nothing there in terms of the resource.
Which speaking about formats, that is actually a mistake I see time and again, or I saw during the pandemic time again, is people who were used to just do thought leaderships because there were going to be events anyways. So they were sort of coasting by with the inserting their piece into other programs. And so what I saw happen a lot was people, once those other events were gone away, people sort of forgot to budget for the actual promotion, right? If you do things digitally, there's going to be a cost, and it can be significant, like to talk about the CPMs and social media and all that type of stuff. So to your point, just going that out there, you should be ready to invest quite a bit of money to get what you've produced into the hands of the right people, and doubly so if there's no other events, other things happening around the firm which you can sort of piggyback on, right? If it has to be from your program, you better keep a significant amount of money back or at hand to solve for the distribution. I think that's a very, very good point. And if you don't have that,
I agree with that. And you also asked me, about. Sorry, I possibly defected answer about distribution and misses in distribution. Now, in other words, we always want to talk about the client. But in reality, if we get the internal distribution right, then the project will probably be a success. So it's fundamentally thinking about what does the client actually do now that works? Some of these events that you're talking about, LinkedIn, I'm talking about, what do they do? What do the partners do that feels confident? And how can we scale that activity through the thought leadership that we're creating? If you start to embed that, and again, start to thinking, end goal first, if you can think of that in format, then we bring the partners in, the partners start using the thought leadership, and everything develops success. So whether that's road shows, whether that's CEO presentations, whether that's cheat sheets, battle cards, ghostwritten blogs, whatever it is, how do we make it as easy as possible for the internal audience to share that? And one client had this lovely kind of phrase, which was effectively created this cheat sheet, which was, if you've got 10, 15 seconds, like the blog post. If you've got 30 seconds to a minute, share the blog post.
Oh, nice.
If you've got 15 minutes, write your own version of that blog post, fire it out to your audience. If you've got an hour, make a presentation to your key client. Lovely.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I've got 15 minutes at the end of my day. I've got an hour tomorrow. That's fantastic. So how do we make it as easy as possible for the senior audience to engage with their audience?
That's another very practical idea. I like how you keep I like how you keep those coming. But Ash, and I'll have to edit this out, but this gives me an idea for a follow-up episode maybe, because you are doing these internal activations all the time. So I should be interviewing you about how to get that part right, like the internal ramp up and activation around major pieces. You could probably talk an hour about that, but
yeah, I guess there is a lot there, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anyway, we're coming up against the hour, so to speak, which is long for us already, but that's fine. I just wanted to ask you, is there anything, before we close, is there anything we sort of didn't touch upon or you wanted to talk about? We touched a little bit on differentiation, which you said you'd be keen to dive deeper on, so either that or anything else.
We talked a little about differentiation, and I think all thought leadership can be different. But we need to think about, if you think about this as a subject matter, you use sustainability, which I think is great. Surprise, surprise, we're producing quite a few projects around sustainability now with an an ever shortening deadline around
COP26, I'm guessing.
No surprise.
Yeah.
Lots of projects. But if you think about sustainability, you think, obviously everybody's talking about sustainability. But think about consultancies. Think, well, actually, what's different about what you actually do? You, the consultancy, what's different about what you do around sustainability? And then think about your ideal client. What is it that they're struggling with sustainability?
Yeah.
And then actually, it's only when you've got the answers to those questions that you should actually look at the competition and think, what are they doing? So don't start off on this quest for white space, end up on the competitor review with making sure that your piece is different, but focus on you and focus on your clients first is kind of what
your client insight and your perspective on that, that's where it starts. So not looking at
and your ideal client, what are they struggling with? But if I could just end, we've talked a lot about kind of the different assets from the C-suite. Lots of people ask me about the future of thought leadership, which I think is really interesting. It is a really interesting place to kind of end. And I would say two things on the future. The first of those things is involving clients.
Yeah.
Now, again, our research would say that if you ask your clients, they will get involved in your thought leadership program if they see value. So they will sit on editorial panels. They are quite happy to be given a survey. They are more than happy to be interviewed. Drawing a ring around your key clients, getting those guys involved, whether we call it ABM, whatever we want to call that, drawing a ring around your key clients, getting those involved in helping to set the shape of your thought leadership, being part of that think tank, great idea. So involve your clients. Secondly, I would say, which gets to the kind of the timing issue and also gets to the budget issue, I think, a little bit, is the idea about the things that we're helping our clients with and not things that can be solved overnight. So think about sustainability. The idea that we produce a report on sustainability, bang, I'm done. I'll do these things in the report, then I'll be sustainable from 2030.
Yeah, 98% of CEOs agree that the planet should be saved. Yeah.
But think about it as a continual dialogue. So it's not just about that initial survey, it's revisiting. So let's just say the survey unearths the problems. We've got the interviews which start talking about solutions. We revisit in a snap survey 6 months after that in order to get an update on what's going on. We build a whole series of events which talks about sector-specific challenges. It needs to be an ongoing program. So these issues are not going to go away. We just need to help our clients and make sure that we help our clients in a continual way.
I think that's right. Yeah. Which you could sort of even the documentation, how you tackle something big like the survey, that could become its own content. You could publish. You could say these are the hypotheses we have. Get some reactions. Then you do a couple of interviews on those. Then you do the survey back. I get it. That's a great thing. It could be an ongoing full year or whatever effort.
And it should be for the cost. And I think that involves a lot of internal soul searching about what does the firm really want to be famous for.
Yeah.
And if you can answer that question, that involves saying no to other things, which I also think is hard, clearly.
Yeah.
But that's what we need to do. Take 2 or 3 themes forward and make sure we own those themes.
Lovely. Well, Andrew, that was great. I don't know if Ash has any more questions.
No, I think these were really good, and we had a really good conversation, Flo. I believe you've gone. Yeah.
Lots of golden nuggets people can take away. So thanks for those. And then last question always is, where can we point people to if they would like to find more about Grist or you or the upcoming, I take it, piece?
A couple of things I would say. Certainly point them to our website so they can download the research themselves. So I'm more than happy to do that. If they want to drop me a line, either via LinkedIn or email, we'll pop them on the list. So we'll get the new research, which we're looking at the final results next week. We'll be doing our analysis and writing. So it'll be early next year by the time that report is out. But we can give some top line findings at the end of this year.
Great. If people, we put that in the show notes, and if people visit the website, I'm not being paid for endorsements or anything, but I like the way you have presented the most recent version. There's you have a form on the website where I can get a customized version of it, right?
So you're talking about the the Data Explorer tool.
Yeah, it's not exactly. It's not a diagnostic, or it's not a benchmark, but I can sort of slice and dice in my own way, which I thought was very interesting. Sort of you guys taking your own medicine, I guess, in terms of packaging and distribution.
So if you think about it, we've done this now. This is the fourth time we've done this. We do it, and we're not, we're not a big agency. We don't have endless budget, but we do it because it works. And I think what we'd like to be famous for is helping our clients understand their clients better.
Yeah.
And that's why we continually do that research. The Data Explorer tool, which is also on the website, allows people to enter, right, hi, I'm Ash. I'm in Germany, wherever, and I'm interested in this question. And you can see the answers according to that split. So it allows you the regional split, the sector split, and the job split.
Nice. That was great.
Yeah.
Cool. So thank you, Andy, for stopping by doing this. Thanks, Ash, for asking pointed questions, and thanks me for recording it. Just kidding.
Yeah, and I guess that's a wrap, Flo.
Yeah, I'll stop the recording here, I guess. Have a nice weekend eventually, guys.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.